don't just take what AI gives you. We have to apply critical thinking. We have to apply editorial to that initial draft and really inject and embed original thinking and our taste, our style, our preferences into that work product. And I think that tension I see more and more. And I'm hoping that we don't forget this part about the human element while leveraging the AI system to augment how we work.
Welcome to Smarter Markets, a weekly podcast featuring the icons and entrepreneurs of technology, commodities, and finance, ranting on the inadequacies of our systems and riffing on ideas for how to solve them. Together, we examine the questions: are we facing a crisis of information or a crisis of trust? And will building smarter markets be the antidote? This episode is brought to you in part by Abax Technologies. AI agents are fundamentally changing how people and organizations interact with computers and the internet. A race is underway to establish the path that will govern the nature of these interactions. Abax Technologies introduces Abax Labs as its center for engaging with the developer community through the release of open source software to promote a path that empowers users to maintain control of their identity, data, and agents in digital spaces. Abax Labs' first release is the Agents++ library, a subset of Abax's ID++ software development kit that has been tuned for use with AI agents. Download Agents++ on GitHub today at github.com/AbaxLabs. That's github.com/AbaxLabs.
Welcome back to How to Raise Your Agent on Smarter Markets. I'm Dave Greely, Chief Economist at Abax Technologies. Our guest today is Joyce Shen, Managing Partner, Together Expedition, an AI professor at the University of California, Berkeley. We'll be discussing how AI is rewiring work, what we can learn from past tech transformations, and what's different this time, from the perspective of a business practitioner, tech investor, and educator. Hello, Joyce. Welcome to Smarter Markets.
Nice to see you, Dave, and thank you for having me.
Oh, really appreciate you coming on the podcast. You bring a unique perspective to these conversations, having been involved with AI as a business practitioner, an investor, and an educator. And I'd like to ask you about what you've seen through those various lenses. But first, I was hoping to take a step back and ask you to set the stage for us. You recently gave a presentation titled The AI Transition, Rewiring Work, Life, and the Global Economy. And I was hoping you could describe for us where you see us being in the AI transition.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, again. And I think we're in a very interesting and exciting time. I think there are a lot more questions than answers, just based on how much investments have gone into AI in the last 4 years. It's hundreds of billions of dollars in the US, in some other major countries. We are seeing the democratization and just rapid adoption of the AI technology in our everyday use and in different industries. And the models are fundamentally different in propelling the innovation forward this time around. And so if you couple both the capital investments as well as the adoption pace and the general understanding of the technology, the way that we learn, the way that we're going to think about how we work, how we add value in organizations are going to, I think, change. Not exactly sure how all of those are going to change, but I think there's a lot more to consider. And in terms of other areas, the economy, the services that we receive, a lot of things will change in terms of how services will be delivered, what automation will look like in the future, how education will be provided and received, how healthcare could be provided and delivered to patients, how drug discovery get done, how we maintain complex infrastructure. So there are multiple levels of changes that are coming, and they're on different time horizon. And some are going to be faster, some are here, and others will take some time. And so my talk, as you mentioned, around AI transition is really talking about some of the clear numbers that we've seen today, which is around capital investments, which often lead to, it's a leading indicator of what might come later, and the pace at which these technology innovations are being built, the rapid, unprecedented consumerization and consumer adoption of some of these technology. You bring that all together and you couple that with other areas of consideration in our economy, in where we stand, is an interesting time to say the least.
Certainly. And you mentioned how the speed, the amount of capital being invested, how widespread the adoption is really unprecedented, almost about the ability to digest all of this. Now, I know you've worked on technology transformations before with both the sellers and the buyers of the technology. From your work with companies like IBM and Thomson Reuters, what did you learn about how to bring technology into large organizations that could be applicable for the transition today?
Well, that's a really hard question and is like $1 billion question. And I think if you look at any of the organizations, I had the opportunity and the great pleasure working at organizations, global companies like IBM and Thomson Reuters. And if you look at these companies, it's pretty amazing what they have been able to do. IBM is over 100 years old. Thomson and Reuters have long history, rich history of using technology to deliver information to end users. And they have been able to stand the test of time and stay competitive and deliver value to their customers in all types of transformation and cycle. And so through that process, I again had the opportunity to really helping these organizations to consider how to bring innovation to drive growth and to draw product innovation, whether through inorganic activities like acquisitions, to venture capital investments, to partnering with other technology companies, or to bring vendors in. I think some common themes. Any organizations, you have the organization, you have people, you have processes, you have products and solutions, and you have customers. And the technology is really one of the underpinning enablers to all of that. The technologies are enabling the organization, the people, the business processes, how we conduct and perform those processes, enable our creation and delivery of those solutions, products, and how we serve those customers. So, what I learned, one of the things is technology is really not at the forefront in technology driven or innovation driven transformation. It's an enabler. And so the most important thing is to really understand each and every part of the organization, their business priorities, the strategic imperatives, the organizational maturity, and the technology maturity to be able to take in the specific technologies at a particular time. So that was my biggest learning is you can't really force AI technology or any technology and just tell the organization, hey, go use it, go build it. Yes, we see some of that and we call that pilots and we call that proof of concepts. But think about at scale adoption of technology that enable customer experience and solutions that we provide around the world and to our customers. It takes huge amount of effort, people, business process, budgeting, investment, customer success, like everything has to be in place in order to do that. And so I think a lot of things that we talked about in terms of being agile, be able to kind of break down this innovation, big ideas into chunks, and really being empathetic to the organization and helping the organization to absorb small piece one by one and helping organizations and the board to create a playbook and say, okay, this is the first step. Based on what we learned, this is the second step. And based on what we learned, here, the third step. And here are the things that we can parallel path. And I think those have worked really well in the past. as sort of a multi-pronged strategy in allowing organizations to responsibly and efficiently taking technology and enable their transformation.
And you've also written that software refreshes roughly every 15 to 20 years, and we might be inside a fourth refresh cycle. What do you think we have to learn from some of those prior cycles, and what do you see as being different this time?
I start with what's different, and I think most folks know what's different. The most major difference in this technology cycle, and I'm sort of talking about the applied AI layer, which is enterprise oriented, and really talking to your last question is how do organizations adopt this technology? What's different this time is that these models, the foundational models that power essentially agents and other derivatives of those, have more reasoning capabilities. Or, in other words, as you hear people say, they're non deterministic. So instead of rigid, rule based, deterministic sort of set of instruction and the widget or the technology will just do the same thing every time, there is room for creativity and flexibility in the way that the technology itself is able to autonomously sort of operate. And that is actually the differentiating attribute, and which means that it opens up opportunity for thinking about new use cases and ways to apply a non-deterministic set of technology or characteristics adjacent to the traditional or your more classical technologies that are generally deterministic, rule-based, not prompt-driven, and doesn't really operate autonomously. You exactly tell what it needs to do, how it integrates, and it does it every millisecond, every second, based on what you tell it to do, and versus there's a bit of autonomy on the other side of what we're going through. So that's the major difference. And of course, in the AI stack, you have a lot of other enabling layers to achieve that as autonomy and the reasoning. And you have, of course, your infrastructure players and others, which will not get into that. That's part of the ecosystem. So that's different. Now, what's happening typically in these major cycles is that there is a process of replatforming. And replatforming meaning the organizations led by the chief technology officers and others will make a series of decisions regarding how are they going to ingest, store, work with different kinds of workloads, data workloads, processing workloads, et cetera. How are they going to build their infrastructure to accommodate the kind of new applications that may be on the new horizon? How do they consider the security posture adjacent to the current security stack they have, again, to accommodate the potential new workflows or applications that are coming. And also, on top of that, you just generally have more innovation every 10, 15 plus years. And so there is that necessary refresh and investment in any case. So, what remains the same is, I think, the consideration of replatforming and that refresh of technology. Organizations are not going to just wake up tomorrow and say, we're going to change everything and rip out the mainframe and putting something else, right? It's just not going to happen because you have so much workload that's on this existing infrastructure. And so the question is really about where are the entry points for this new platforming, and different organizations, different industries have different thinkings, but generally you start with sort of the least important applications or the easiest workload to update those and then move down to the most critical workloads that you really have to think through a lot of considerations, whether it's business continuity, security, redundancy, et cetera, to ensure that reliability and resilience.
And you emphasize that what's different this time is the ability to use these agents, which have their own autonomy and unpredictability, not being deterministic. And so I feel like in these past replatformings, there was more of a sharp distinction between people and technology. And now we have agents which are blurring the line, behaving somewhat like people and somewhat like technology. How does that change the replatforming? Because now it's not only kind of, I guess in the past would be, you think of it as retraining your people to use a new technology. And there's some of that, but there's also, it's almost like introducing new team members. Maybe I'm anthropomorphizing too much, but how do you think about that type of integration?
I think it's a great question. And you're absolutely right. I think in the previous cycles, it's really about adding to the technology stack to enable better delivery of services and processing of information. So if you think about mainframe, you think about client and server transition, you think about moving to the web, you think about software as a service, you think about moving to cloud. Those are just major extensions or expansions of capabilities of accommodating working with different workloads in service of the different kinds of applications that we can now build and deliver to customers in an array of uses. And here you have additional consideration, as exactly as you said, Dave, is the human in the loop, or whether how do you consider these more autonomous reasoning technologies sitting adjacent to what humans do. Now, you, of course, have different school of thoughts. And one school of thought is the technology will not replace the humans and the autonomous reasoning systems will reduce the mundane tasks that humans perform. I think there is certainly merit to that. And we saw that in the wave of robotic process automation and previous automation technologies that certainly have done that. And I would expect that the more advanced technology that we have now will continue that path. Now, the bigger question is, because these models are smarter and they have taken in a lot of human knowledge and world knowledge in becoming what they are today, and so they can do a lot more. And so I think there is a big question around, how do we sort of design a future technology human integrated world where we still have humans do the necessary work. We still are able to build that talent pipeline. We're able to serve our customers in the best way while incorporating these technologies in the most appropriate fashion. And in my view, I think many people are still, in myself included, in the experiment phase. And I think these are the questions I simply don't have a crystal clear answer to. I think, well, it's a process of learning for everyone. And we're going to learn through organizations and individuals. This actually works really well, but this actually worked well technically, but it doesn't really work well for our organizational culture or for how we actually want to serve our customers. And so we have to come back and rethink how we want to incorporate these technologies. And I think that's what we are. We have gone past I call the easy phase of the replatforming, we're still in that process, and it's a long process. But the easy phase is to get folks to use ChatGPT and other tools, which are phenomenal. The hard part is now, and you see activities in the markets that are really trying to really push this forward, which is, how do you get complex systems like organizations to really consider this question and to integrate organizational design, people design, culture, technology, innovation, driving customer success all together while stay competitive.
I like the way you framed that, of like, there's been the easy part and there's then the hard part, because as you describe previous transformations, previous replatformings, it sounds like a lot of work and a lot of thought that has to go into it at an organizational level to get it right. And I think a lot of the caricature of right, is that it'll just make everything easy and we don't need to think and it'll do it for us. And it's interesting because, along with it being something that everyone's had access to, it's not like it's in a sandbox in an organization, right? Like, it's not like you're experimenting with it in one small area. It's kind of cutting across. And does that open up the scope for more mistakes at an organizational level? The fact that it's kind of everywhere all at once?
I think there is a little bit of that. I mean, I think if I take the investor view and I think the market sort of baked this in, is that there is huge opportunity in this replatforming because it's not just the things that we talked about, but there are derivative effects across the entire stacks of technology, ranging from data management all the way to security and everything between. And for sure, if you think about the agentic architectures, which are being discussed as the hottest topic right now, and is sort of the emerging way of thinking about utilization of these large language models in enterprise IT infrastructure and architectures, is when you have agents or multi agent structures that can perform tasks to achieve a set of goals, inevitably there are more elements in that architecture, there are more connections, and there are data that are sitting still within those agents itself and also in transit. And those individual components are also communicating out through the various protocols that are now being built to communicate with existing workloads and environments. And so suddenly you have both your existing environments, infrastructures, and applications, and you have this sort of parallel world that's talking to your existing world. And so there would be more considerations in terms of how do we think about vulnerabilities? How do we think about ensuring that each component is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing? How do we know that? How do we get those telemetry data? How do we actually then relate those data back to our existing system and understand the entire environment? And so all these are, I think, open questions. A lot of people, it's a very exciting time, as I say. A lot of people working on these problems and challenges, anticipating the world's moving that way and that the replatforming is going to take shape in that direction. And to that end, I think we're pretty early in that phase.
Another consideration, of course, is money and expense. I wanted to ask you, there have been a number of stories recently about companies blowing through their token budgets much faster than they anticipate. And I think agents are often a piece of that. How do you think companies should be thinking about the economics of tokens and AI in their business and budgets?
Well, I think that's probably a favorite topic of CFOs right now in organizations because probably the budget that was set are misaligned with what's actually happening. One, I think that's a symptom of experimentation. We learn from doing and we're learning how these things are working. And on one hand, there are a lot of people working on that problem. I think there is a lot of innovation, entrepreneurs working on how do you make these agent systems more efficient? How do we get them more efficient? And there are many layers to that, whether it's to help them retain the memory more efficiently, working with other elements more efficiently. How do you sort of build kind of the information rails can transcend a very complex system. So all of those are things that enterprise technology have done before in other paradigms, and those same considerations and practices will come to this new paradigm. Now, on the organization side, to your question about how should organization think about it, I think organizations will come to a point, and this is my hypothesis, is that the board and the CEO and the leadership team at some point will have to consider a sophisticated way and thinking about what are the applications, what are the use cases, what are the business processes that are most appropriate for using the new type of technology, specifically the agentic technology, the foundational model driven sort of outputs versus your more classical machine learning and deep learning techniques. And my view is that it's going to be a hybrid. Just like we have a hybrid cloud infrastructure for most companies, you have on premise for certain workloads, you have cloud based application for other workloads, you have organizations that make that determination based on their budget and their needs. I think the same here, that it's going to be a hybrid world where as part of thinking through that AI strategy, the playbook in adopting these technologies, I think naturally people will realize that certain applications, certain types of processing or computation classical ML is great and maybe it's better. And then for certain applications and use cases and how we deliver those experiences and services to our clients, internal, external, the generative models, the agentic architecture is going to be better. So I think we're going to have that world that coexists for a while, and that will likely impact the economics of token use and related things.
And I mentioned earlier, you've also been an investor in technology companies. How are you thinking today about where AI can be profitably applied and commercialized?
Another hard question, David. I think about this all the time as an investor in my investment firm, Together Expedition. And the biggest question is, where is the value capture? It's easy to see the technology and the potential of the technology. It's a much harder question. As a way to sort of answer a question is, what will drive the value for the end users? And it's really challenging right now because everything's moving so fast. And when things move really fast, inevitably there are a lot of things that just we're going to learn that's going to work or not work. And people haven't made the decision or know what actually will be the things that they will be using the new technology. And so the biggest areas that we think about is, how do companies really curate their data as strategic assets in then leveraging these models, because most of the data in the world are still dark, meaning they haven't been used in training these models. They sit within organizations, and there is a lot of knowledge embedded in those data that are human knowledge that we have curated that are represented in those data. And so we like companies that really understand domain specific data and the knowledge that are representing this data. We also like companies that really, really understand the specificity of industry level problems. And because that's the only way for that iteration to get to the value capture.
And I wanted to mention, maybe there's another hybrid model there, right? 'Cause I think what a lot of people are trying to figure out is, you have the LLMs and the agents, and they're pre-trained on kind of broad sets of data. You'd really like them to learn on the job. So you want them to have access to your own internal data. Of course, you don't want them to share it, but you do want them to be able to learn from it. How is this really shining a light on how we manage our data, and where do we need to make some improvements there?
I spent a lot of time on this topic, both in investment thesis and with my students. And I have this saying that if we don't have usable data, then we don't have useful data. If we don't get our house in order, if we can't get our back office in order, we can't really have a great front office, in the sense that all the applications, all the innovation that we build is the front office, right? It's user facing, they're using it, they're adopting it. But behind it, they're on the back end, there's a lot of stuff that's happening. And these models, if you think about sort of the market forces, everyone has access to these models by and large. Open source, closed source, everybody can go and access different agent frameworks. Everybody can learn how to build agents. That's not really a barrier to entry, and that's not really a barrier to create something special. Now, so what is the barrier? And one barrier is domain expertise. How do you hunt for these great ideas? But then what data do we need to actually make it happen? And these large language models and foundational models, although they have improved significantly over time in the last few years, everyone has the same access to these models, which are trained on information that are available to them. And so the ability to have high quality data, the ability to have data that have metadata, the ability to have data that are able to get linked to other data sets, the ability to really understand the use cases and consider what alternative data might be useful, the ability to really incorporate best practices in data governance and data protection into the day to day work. of or the use of this data, the practice of understanding where the data came from, data lineage, a lot of these things that the data experts spend time on, it's a prerequisite now, in my view, for any company that wants to fully take advantage of AI technology because the models are there. And you want to create a retrieval system, you want to create a knowledge system, you want to create a chatbot. You can't just rely on the foundational models. You need to bring other knowledge bases, so to speak, or context, as many of the folks in the industry talked about. But what are those things? Those are information, those are data, right? Those are proprietary. And I think, David, in your work and in my work, like we truly understand data as strategic assets. And without that trustworthy and high quality data, we can't really do anything that's reliable. And that I think applies to both humans and to agents.
Absolutely. And you mentioned your students. You teach data science and AI at Berkeley. I was curious, maybe you've already mentioned some of these, but what are some of the most important lessons that you're trying to teach your students to prepare them for the role that AI is going to play in their careers?
Absolutely. So I think teaching the technologies and how to work with these models goes without saying, right? It's a prerequisite. And what I think all the time is how is the future of the roles of AI changing? I've been teaching for 10 years as an adjunct at UC Berkeley. And when I started, data science wasn't even used broadly, let alone machine learning and deep learning. And so things have changed quite a bit. And what I've learned is that, I always encourage students to really think about they're not just technical practitioners, but they're technical practitioners who need to be able to deliver business value or value to organizations. And sounds obvious, but it's really hard to implement because it take a holistic set of skills to be able to do that. I try to teach our students to be leaders, to really be able to think in practical terms, but also be able to think long term. We're able to bring big ideas and new ideas to organizations, but we need to be able to help organizations to really break it down into smaller consumable pieces and give the organization ideas and roadmaps and say, oh, here's a way that we can try it. And also understand the concerns and considerations cross-functionally of colleagues in finance, compliance, risk, products, delivery, support. That's leadership in new types of AI role is you really sit in the middle, you're expert in these models, but we need to be able to work with others. And I think another big one, the third one is really be able to think about what problems should be solved. What are these high impact problems? And how do solutions to these problems, again, capture value for our colleagues, for our teams, for our organizations to enable our organization to stay competitive or offer new offerings. And that's not a technology question, but I think in the market, if I look at a lot of the new roles that are emerging, organizations are hungry for talent who can really understand the business imperatives, concerns, and also bring the insights of AI technology and other technology, and then give a balanced and practical and yet strategic playbook. To me, that's the unicorn.
It's almost like our ability to solve problems has never been greater. So, like, let's pick the right problems to work on becomes more and more important. So, I know you advise your students on their capstone projects, and the idea of being able to take an idea and turn it into something useful in the real world. It's such a great lesson and it's hard. I was curious, what do you see as some of the most successful projects having in common? And what does it take to go from just having an idea to having a real world product that can be valuable to a business?
Yeah, absolutely. And call this sort of rapid prototyping, and students do this in 14 weeks end to end. So to a point, it's a very short amount of time. The first thing that we're trying to really preach and guide our students is something I learned in my career, over close to 20 years in technology and business and finance, is that it really doesn't matter if I like to build something or if I build something that look great. What really matters is that the end users actually find it useful. I know it sounds obvious, right? And in the startup world, we talk about product market fit, we talk about sort of initial validation, we call this customer discovery. But that is one of the most, if not the most important thing, is that don't be in love with my own idea and my own creation. It may look great, but it needs to be user, customer, market driven. Otherwise, there is no chance of, to our earlier conversation, to create value or to capture value or to even capture the imagination of potential users or to inspire them to think about, wow, this is a different way of doing this. They need that alignment. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is for great projects is as we talked about before, is that just very clear specificity of the problem. It's not just about, hey, let's build a diagnostic engine using the greatest models. It's like truly understand what exactly are we diagnosing? What has been achieved in the marketplace that have given the level of success about, think about a disease detection use case. So, but what has not been explored is A and B. And why is that? And is it a technology barrier? Is it data barrier? Or is it simply that no one has really gone and talked to users and discovered that actually in the work of the end user radiologists or the like, it's not just about getting that single output. They actually need something else in that workflow. So the specificity of the problem and the specificity of the user needs make great projects, capstone projects great, because that then give them that differentiation. And I think the last thing I would say is that you hear this from many entrepreneurs, and I see this in my daily work as an investor working with entrepreneurs, is that no great company and products can be built by one single person. And the ability of people to work together and to draw on the best traits and strength and expertise of teammates while also creating an environment where we can all sort of learn together and go on to this expedition and figure out things that we all don't know. And there are a lot of things that many people don't know because things are moving so fast. If you bring all of that together, that's where the magic happens.
I love that you bring that up because when I think about there's a lot of conversations around AI and its benefits and challenges to education. And I'm curious, over your 10 years with Berkeley, it sounds like one, having access to AI could be a problem in getting that magic to happen because some people might feel like they don't need to work with other humans because they've got their agents or they've got their AI. On the other hand, the ability to rapidly prototype something has probably never been greater. And I'm curious, how are you seeing how like AI is influencing how your students are able to do these capstone projects relative to the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very interesting question. It's a really timely question. I see this also outside. I just, again, in my work, working with entrepreneurs, I think there is this natural tension, exactly as you talked about, this dynamic, which is that we have all these code generation tools. We have all these prototyping builders that anyone can write natural language prompts. And it's amazing that we can really just get a prototype out in a couple hours and deploy that and show people, right? That was not the case before. And yet the tension is the ability to inject or maintain, I would say, maintain that human judgment and that human touch in this whole process. And it goes back to the questions that we were talking about is I can prototype really quickly, but what should I prototype? What are the signals that I should be getting to ensure that I'm actually prototyping something people want? perhaps the AI tools can help us to do the brainstorming, but at the end of the day, we need to be the decision makers on that and be able to defend the decision that we make. Because if we were to launch the product, it's going to be clear whether people want it or not, right? And I think I see that in other areas as well. We have these great tools that allow us to generate slides and things. And one of the things that I mentor students outside of Berkeley, underserved students in college through a nonprofit. And I recently gave a talk before their internships at various Wall Street organizations and banks and firms is how do you think about the use of AI? And it's inevitable that they have to sort of confront this. And one of the biggest things is about having human judgment. Don't just take what AI gives you. We have to apply critical thinking. We have to apply editorial to that initial draft and really inject and embed original thinking and our taste, our style, our preferences into that work product. And I think that tension I see more and more. And I'm hoping that we don't forget this part about the human element while leveraging the AI system to augment how we work.
Thanks again to Joyce Shen, Managing Partner, Together Expedition, an AI professor, University of California, Berkeley. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll be back next week with another episode of How to Raise Your Agent. We hope you'll join us.
This episode is brought to you in part by Abax Technologies. AI agents are fundamentally changing how people and organizations interact with computers and the internet. A race is underway to establish the path that will govern the nature of these interactions. Abax Technologies introduces Abax Labs as its center for engaging with the developer community through the release of open source software to promote a path that empowers users to maintain control of their identity, data, and agents in digital spaces. Abax Labs' first release is the Agents++ library, a subset of Abax's ID++ software development kit that has been tuned for use with AI agents. Download Agents++ on GitHub today at github.com/AbaxLabs. That's github.com/AbaxLabs. That concludes this week's episode of Smarter Markets by Abax. For episode transcripts and additional episode information, including research, editorial, and video content, please visit smartermarkets.media. Please help more people discover the podcast by leaving a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. Smarter Markets is presented for informational and entertainment purposes only. The information presented on Smarter Markets should not be construed as investment advice. Always consult a licensed investment professional before making investment decisions. The views and opinions expressed on Smarter Markets are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the show's hosts or producer. Smarter Markets, its hosts, guests, employees, and producer, Abax Technologies, shall not be held liable for losses resulting from investment decisions based on informational viewpoints presented on Smarter Markets. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week.